Ethan Hayes woke up to the faint hum of the air conditioner in their sprawling Houston suburban home. The first rays of dawn slipped through the blinds, painting golden streaks across the polished oak floor. He lay still for a moment, listening to the steady breathing of Laura, his wife of 14 years, curled up under a light gray blanket. She was a deep sleeper, always had been, and Ethan found a strange comfort in that unchanging habit, a steady anchor from the chaotic days he'd left behind. He slid out of bed, careful not to jostle the mattress, and glanced around the room. A family photo hung on the wall across from the bed. Ethan, Laura, Sophie, and Ben, snapped during a camping trip to Big Bend National Park 3 years back. Sophie, 9 then, grinned wide with a gap-toothed smile, while 6-year-old Ben clutched a plastic toy fish Ethan had snagged from the gift shop. Laura stood beside him, her arm slung over his shoulder, her eyes sparkling with joy. Looking at it, Ethan felt a warmth spread through his chest. This was the life he dreamed of, a quiet haven after years of fighting in the dust and heat. At 42, Ethan was a guy who'd seen enough of the world to value what he had. A former Marine, he'd done 2 tours in Afghanistan, where every day was a roll of the dice, sand, gunfire, and no guarantees you'd see tomorrow. Now he worked as a security consultant for oil companies across Texas, a gig that demanded his know-how and paid well enough to afford this 2-story house in Pinewood Estates, a peaceful pocket on Houston's outskirts. Pinewood Estates was the kind of neighborhood you'd see in a movie. Wide streets lined with towering oaks, lawns trimmed just right, houses painted in soft neutrals with low white fences. The neighbors were friendly without being nosy. The Petersons on the left dropped off cookies most weekends, and the Martinezes next door invited them over for barbecue whenever the weather cooled off. Ethan liked it here. The calm, the way kids pedaled bikes around until the sun dipped low, their laughter bouncing off the leaves. He padded downstairs, slippers slapping against the wood, and stepped into the bright kitchen. Sunlight poured through a big window overlooking the backyard, carrying the faint whiff of last night's lasagna, Sophie's favorite, with that stretchy golden cheese she loved. Ethan flipped on the coffee maker and leaned against the counter, staring out at the yard. The wooden swing set he'd built for Ben last year stood still in the morning breeze, a green soccer ball lying nearby next to the fence. He smirked, picturing a weekend kick-around with Ben. The 9-year-old had some talent, even if he tripped over his own feet half the time. The coffee maker gurgled, filling the air with a rich, dark aroma. Ethan poured 2 mugs, one for him, one for Laura, and carried hers upstairs. He set it on her nightstand, brushing her shoulder lightly. "Rise and shine, sleepyhead," he said, teasing softly. Laura mumbled something garbled and yanked the blanket over her head. Ethan chuckled, shaking his head. Same old Laura, always begging for 10 more minutes. Back downstairs, he whipped up breakfast for the kids. Sophie, 12, breezed into the kitchen with her hair in a high ponytail, clutching a chunky science textbook. "Dad, I need stuff for a volcano model next week," she announced, plopping into a chair. Ben shuffled in behind her, eyes bleary but still mischievous enough to nudge her seat with his foot. "Quit kicking me," Sophie snapped, and Ethan stepped in before it turned into a full-blown brawl. "All right, you two, eat up, then I'm driving you to school," he said, sliding plates of toast with peanut butter across the table. Sophie launched into a spiel about her volcano experiment, while Ben munched away, interrupting with goofy questions like, "Do volcanoes really spit out candy?" Ethan listened, grinning to himself, soaking in these moments, the best part of his day. But as he drove them to school, Sophie shotgun, Ben thumping the back of his seat, Ethan's mind wandered. He thought back to the early days with Laura, meeting her at a dive bar near Camp Pendleton. She'd been a college kid then, bold and full of dreams, her laugh cutting through the crowd when he told some dumb boot camp story. The way she tilted her head, hair spilling over her shoulder, had hooked him hard. They'd married young, built this life from scratch, despite friends warning they were rushing it. Things hadn't always been smooth. His rocky shift out of the Marines, those sleepless nights when Ben was a colicky baby. But they'd made it through, so why did it feel like she was drifting away now? Laura came down as he got back from the drop-off, already in work mode. White blouse, gray pencil skirt, hair pulled back tight. She worked as a loan officer at a downtown bank, a solid job that had gotten brutal lately with long hours. "Coffee's ready," Ethan said, nodding at the mug on the counter. She grabbed it, took a quick sip, and gave a distracted nod. No, thanks, no warm glance like she used to. She scrolled her phone, thumb flicking fast, then snatched her purse. "Running late. Might be home late tonight. Meeting," she said, her tone flat before heading out the door. Ethan stood there watching the door shut, that uneasy feeling from earlier creeping back. She'd been staying late more often, 2, 3 times a week now. He told himself it was work, that the bank was pushing her hard with new loan targets. Laura had griped about picky clients and endless meetings before, but today her silence, the way she wouldn't meet his eyes, made him wonder if something bigger was off. He headed to his home office, a cramped nook where he worked remote days when he wasn't at a client's site. The computer hummed to life, security specs for an offshore rig popping up on the screen. But he couldn't focus. His thoughts kept circling back to Laura, how she always had her phone glued to her hand, how their talks had shrunk to logistics about schedules and groceries. They used to sprawl on the couch after the kids crashed, swapping stories. Her about some quirky coworker, him about Marine days. Now, just awkward quiet. Ethan pushed his chair back, grabbed his cold coffee, and stepped out to the backyard. A light breeze rustled the old oak's leaves. He looked at the swing set, picturing Laura pushing Ben on it, her laugh ringing out as the kids squealed in delight. That memory felt like a luxury now, something slipping out of reach. He didn't know exactly what was wrong, but his gut, the same one that had kept him alive in Afghanistan, was sounding the alarm. Something wasn't right, and this time, he couldn't brush it off. Ethan stood in the kitchen, the overhead light casting a stark glow across the white tile floor, his shadow stretching out beneath him. It was pushing 8 p.m., and the kids were upstairs. Sophie hunched over her math homework, Ben messing around with his Lego sets in his room. Laura still wasn't home. She'd texted earlier that afternoon. "Meeting's running long. Don't wait up." Ethan stared at the message on his phone, thumb hovering over the screen. That morning's unease now a heavy lump lodged in his chest. He set the phone down and grabbed a beer from the fridge, popping the cap off with a quick flick against the counter, a trick he'd picked up in the Marines. The sharp hiss cut through the quiet house. He took a swig, the bitter taste sliding down his throat, but it did nothing to quiet the thoughts spinning in his head. Laura coming home late wasn't exactly news. She'd been stuck at the bank until 9 or 10 plenty of times these past few months, but lately her excuses were starting to feel flimsy. Big client needs last-minute approval. Boss wanted to hash out strategy. Ethan had nodded along, trusting her, but now he wasn't so sure. He wandered into the living room and sank into the brown leather sofa, the spot where he and Laura used to crash for movie nights. A small framed photo sat on the coffee table. Their wedding day, Laura in a simple white dress, him in a too-tight suit he'd felt awkward as hell wearing after years in uniform. He picked it up, running a finger over the glass, remembering how she'd squeezed his hand so hard he'd joked she'd break his bones. Now, her hands only clung to her phone, not him. A chime broke his thoughts. Laura's phone, buzzing from the pocket of her coat hanging by the door. She'd forgotten it that morning, rushing out in a blur. Ethan hesitated. He wasn't the type to snoop, but curiosity, or maybe suspicion, got the better of him. He got up, crossed to the coat hook, and pulled the phone out. The screen lit up with a new notification, and the sender's name hit him like a punch. Ryan. Ryan Carter. Ethan's heart slammed against his ribs, a jolt like someone yanking a cord inside him. Ryan was a buddy from the Corps, a big loud Marine who'd cracked terrible jokes over lukewarm coffee in the dead of night. They'd survived hell together in Helmand, splitting the last cigarette when rations ran dry. After Ethan got out, Ryan landed in Houston working logistics, and they'd kept in touch. He'd been over to the house, grilling burgers, watching football, even kicking a ball around with Ben. Ethan trusted him like family, but this message didn't look like a friendly check-in. Ethan stared at the preview on the lock screen. "Miss you already." His brow furrowed. fingers tightening around the phone. Could be a mix-up, Ryan texting the wrong person, but his gut screamed otherwise. He knew Laura's passcode, 0609, the kids' birthdays mashed together. She'd never bothered changing it, probably too lazy or figured it didn't matter. Ethan punched it in, his hand trembling slightly as he opened the messages. The thread with Ryan popped up, and each line sliced into him like a blade. "Miss you already," Ryan had sent at 8:42 that morning. Below it, Laura's reply. "Me too. Last night was amazing." Ethan scrolled up, his breath hitching. "Can't wait to see you again," she'd written Tuesday. "You make me feel so alive," from a week ago. And then, from Ryan, "You're everything to me. I can't imagine my life without you." Sent last night, when Laura claimed she was stuck at the bank. Ethan dropped the phone onto the table, his hand shaking so bad he nearly knocked over the beer. Last night, he'd cooked spaghetti for the kids, checked Sophie's homework, read Ben a bedtime story. Meanwhile, Laura was where? With Ryan. Not in a meeting, not working late. She'd lied to his face, and he'd bought it. "Dad?" Sophie's voice yanked him back from the edge. She stood at the top of the stairs, drowning in an oversized hoodie, clutching her math book. "You okay? You look pale." Ethan swallowed hard, shoving the phone into his pocket. "I'm fine, kiddo. Just tired. You done with that homework?" "Almost," she said, eyeing him a beat longer before heading back up. Ethan slumped against the wall, sucking in deep breaths, forcing himself to stay steady. He couldn't let the kids see him crack. Not yet. Laura rolled in at 10, hair a little messy, a faint whiff of perfume trailing her. Not her usual scent. "Meeting's done," she said, dropping her bag on a chair, flashing a tired smile. Team wanted to grab drinks to celebrate. Couldn't say no. She pecked his cheek, breezy as ever, but to Ethan it felt like ice, hollow. He nodded, jaw clenched, watching her head upstairs with that carefree stride he used to believe in. He didn't sleep that night. Lying in bed, a chasm between him and Laura's steady breathing, he wanted to scream, but he held it in. He needed more than texts he wasn't supposed to see. He needed proof he could stand on. Next morning, after dropping the kids at school, Ethan called in sick, blaming a cold. He drove to a rundown electronics shop on the edge of town and bought a cheap prepaid burner phone with cash. No paper trail. Then he parked in an alley a few blocks from Laura's bank, behind a sandwich joint, eyes locked on the main entrance of the glassy high-rise. He waited, hands gripping the wheel, steady as he'd been on recon missions years back. At 6 p.m. sharp, Laura stepped out, navy coat draped over her arm, phone in hand. She didn't head to the employee lot. Instead, she hopped a cab. Ethan fired up the engine, tailing her at a safe distance. 2 cars between them, his marine instincts kicking in. Stay low, stay sharp. The cab pulled up to the Rusty Anchor, a dive bar in Montrose with a flickering red neon sign. Ethan parked across the street, killed the headlights, and watched. Laura walked in, and less than 10 minutes later, Ryan's black Jeep rolled up. Ethan's pulse hammered as Ryan climbed out, leather jacket slung over his broad frame, strolling in with that cocky ease. Through the bar's window, dim light spilled over them. Laura sliding into a booth, Ryan scooting close. Ethan saw their hands brush across the table, saw Laura laugh, a laugh he hadn't heard at home in months. Ryan leaned in, whispering something, and she nodded, eyes bright. This wasn't a catch-up. It was a date, a secret world he'd been locked out of. Ethan sat there over an hour, watching them grin and flirt, Ryan's hand resting on her shoulder like she was his. He didn't barge in, didn't flip tables. He drove home, the burner phone silent on the passenger seat. He'd seen enough, but what he needed now wasn't just the truth, it was what to do with it. Ethan didn't sleep that night. He crashed on the living room sofa, the streetlight outside leaking through the curtains, throwing faint streaks across the ceiling. The wall clock ticked relentlessly, but every second only sharpened his focus. Images of Laura and Ryan at the Rusty Anchor looped in his mind. Her smile, the way Ryan's hand grazed hers, a movie he couldn't pause. He clutched an empty beer bottle, fingers white-knuckled from gripping too hard. But he didn't cry, didn't smash anything. He'd learned to bottle up chaos in the Marines. Losing it out there could have gotten him killed. Dawn crept in, gray and heavy with thick clouds. Ethan hauled himself up, joints popping from hours hunched over. He brewed coffee but let it sit, staring at the steam curling off the mug. He needed a game plan. The truth was out. Laura had betrayed him with Ryan, a guy he'd called a brother. Knowing it wasn't enough, though, he had to act, had to claw back something from this wreckage. He waited until noon after the kids were at school and Laura was at the bank. His phone buzzed. A text from her. "Home early tonight. Want to talk?" Ethan stared at it, a cold smirk tugging at his lips. Talk? Now after everything she'd pulled? He didn't reply, just pocketed the phone and drove downtown to Sarah Bennett's office, perched on the 11th floor of a sleek glass building. Sarah was a divorce lawyer a buddy had vouched for. Sharp, no BS, with gray-streaked hair tied back tight and eyes that cut like knives. Ethan stepped into her office, the scent of polished wood mixing with a hint of coffee. She sat behind a wide desk in a navy blazer, pen poised over a yellow legal pad. "Sit down, Hayes," she said, her voice low and steady. "Heard you need help. What's going on?" Ethan took a seat, sucked in a breath, and laid it all out. Ryan, the texts he'd found on Laura's phone, the scene he'd watched unfold at the bar last night. He pulled the burner phone from his pocket, flipped through the blurry shots of Laura and Ryan cozying up, her leaning into him, the soft bar light catching their faces. Sarah scanned each one, jotting notes fast, her brows knitting tighter as he wrapped up. "This is what I've got," Ethan said, his throat dry. "But I need more. I want the kids, the house, and I want her to pay." Sarah set her pen down, locking eyes with him. "Texas is no fault for divorce, but cheating can sway custody and assets. These texts, these pics, they're a strong start. If she and Ryan play dumb, though, we need something undeniable. Can you get into her email? Bank records?" Ethan nodded slowly. "She uses the same password for everything. I can figure it out." He didn't love the idea of digging deeper, but this wasn't the time to back off. Sarah's lips twitched into a thin, humorless smile. "Good. Grab as much as you can. Emails, receipts, anything tying them together. And Ethan," she leaned forward, "don't let your feelings screw this up. You're fighting for your kids, not just yourself." He left with a list of steps scribbled on a sheet of paper, his head clearer than it had been in days. On the way home, he swung by an office supply store, snagging a small USB drive to stash evidence. He wasn't about to forgive, wasn't about to let Laura and Ryan off easy. They'd pick this path, and he'd make damn sure they walked it with consequences. That night, Laura came home early like she'd said, strolling in at 6 with a pizza box, a peace offering maybe. Sophie and Ben cheered, scrambling down to grab slices, while Ethan hung back by the kitchen doorway, watching her. She wore a loose beige sweater, hair down, but her eyes dodged his. "Thought we could eat together," she said, setting the box on the table, her voice straining for normal. "Been a while." Ethan nodded, letting the kids dig in first, then motioned her to the living room once Sophie and Ben were parked upstairs with the TV. She sat on the sofa, hands clasped tight, and he stood across from her, hands jammed in his pockets. "You wanted to talk?" he started, voice low and icy. "Go ahead." Laura took a shaky breath, staring at the floor. "Ethan, I know I've been off lately. Work's been hell. I've been snappy. I'm sorry if I've upset you." She looked up, eyes glistening, but he didn't budge. "Cut the act, Laura," he snapped, stepping closer. "I know about Ryan, your texts, the bar last night. I saw it all." Her face went pale, lips parting, but no sound coming out. Ethan yanked the burner phone from his pocket, pulled up the pics of her and Ryan, and held it out. "There. You two laughing like I don't exist. Thought I wouldn't catch on." Laura clapped a hand over her mouth, shoulders trembling. "Ethan, I didn't mean it. It just happened. You don't get it. I've been so empty here. You're always tied up, always distant. Ryan, he—" "Don't pin this on me," he cut her off, his voice sharp as a blade. "You chose to cheat with my friend." You think I didn't notice you pulling away? Phone always in your hand, late nights, lying straight to my face? I trusted you, Laura. Not anymore. She broke down, but it wasn't loud sobs, just choked gasps, like she knew excuses wouldn't fly. I'm sorry, she whispered. I don't want to lose you, lose this family. Ryan just, he made me feel seen. Ethan let out a harsh laugh, turning away to rein in the anger boiling up. Seen? He's my buddy, Laura. I let him in this house, let him hang with my kids, and you made me the fool. He faced her again, eyes dark. I'm filing for divorce. The kids stay with me. Laura shot up, grabbing his arm, but he jerked free. Ethan, no, we can fix this. We can't, he said, flat and final. You broke it. He turned and headed upstairs, leaving her there, hands over her face in the quiet. Later, when she'd gone to bed, Ethan grabbed her laptop from the desk in their room. She'd left it unlocked, a rare slip. He logged into her email with that same old passcode, 0609. The inbox loaded, and there they were. Dozens of messages with Ryan, flirty at first, then raw. One from last week froze him. Austin's perfect for us. Fresh start, just you and me. They weren't just screwing around. They were planning to ditch him, ditch the kids, ditch everything. He copied it all to the USB, hands shaking with rage and hurt. This wasn't just betrayal, it was a blueprint to erase him from their lives. He shut the laptop, stood, and glanced at Laura sleeping soundly. But this time he didn't see the woman he'd loved, just a stranger tearing his world apart. Ethan knew divorce wouldn't be the end of it. He'd make them pay. Not out of spite, but for justice. With the USB in his pocket and Sarah's words in his head, he started plotting, step by step, to ensure Laura and Ryan couldn't duck the fallout they'd earned. Ethan woke up on the guest room bed, early light filtering through thin curtains, spilling across the faded gray rug. He'd moved out of the master bedroom after confronting Laura, unwilling to share space with her any longer. Birds chirped outside in the yard, a cheerful sound that couldn't touch the storm still churning inside him. Last night, he'd pored over the USB's contents again. Emails, texts, Laura and Ryan's Austin escape plan. Every word stung like a fresh cut, but they were also ammo. He wasn't about to let them walk away winners. He rolled out of bed, threw on an old t-shirt and jeans, and geared up for a day that'd settle things. Sarah Bennett had emailed that morning. Temporary divorce papers were ready, prioritizing custody for him based on Laura's affair and instability. But Ethan wasn't just after a legal win. He wanted Laura and Ryan to face him, to face the mess they'd made, with no room to hide behind apologies or silence. He fired off a text to Laura from his main phone. 7 tonight, come home. Ryan too. We're sorting this out. No elaboration, just sent it and waited. Laura replied 2 hours later, curt. Fine. Ethan's lip curled. He knew she had no choice. He called Ryan next, voice cold as steel. 7, my place. No excuses. Ryan muttered something about a packed schedule, but Ethan shut him down. Be there, or I bring it all to you. Ryan grumbled an okay, reluctance dripping from his tone. That afternoon, Ethan prepped. He printed every email from the USB, Laura and Ryan's lovey-dovey notes, their scheme to bolt to Austin, stacking them into a thick pile inside a black briefcase. He uploaded the bar photos to his laptop, picking the sharpest ones. Laura tilting her head with a grin, Ryan's hand on hers across the table. He even loaded a simple recording app onto the burner phone, just in case tonight's showdown needed extra proof. This wasn't about feelings. It was a fight he had to win clean. At 6:55, Laura walked in, gray coat slung over her arm, eyes red like she'd been crying. She didn't speak, just sank onto the sofa, clutching her purse tight. 5 minutes later, Ryan showed up, a paper coffee cup from some nearby joint in hand, trying to play it cool but his eyes giving him away, nervous as hell. Ethan stood in the middle of the living room, ceiling light casting his shadow long across the floor. He didn't offer seats, didn't say hi. He flipped open the briefcase and dumped the stack of papers onto the coffee table with a hard thud. Here, he said, voice low and cutting. Everything you've been doing behind my back. Emails, pics, Your little Austin fantasy. I've got it all. Laura bent forward, hands shaking as she flipped through the pages. Her face drained of color when she hit the "Austin's gonna be great for us" email she'd sent Ryan last week. Ryan set his coffee down, staring at the floor, not daring to look up. You think I'm some chump? Ethan went on, stepping closer. Laura, you trashed this family. Ryan, you stabbed me in the back. Me, the guy who called you a brother. You were going to leave me and the kids in the dust for your happy little life somewhere else? Laura looked up, tears streaking her face. Ethan, I'm sorry. I didn't know how to stop it. I messed up. Save it, he snapped, hand up to cut her off. I don't want your cheap sorries. You picked him, lied to me for months, and you. He turned to Ryan, eyes blazing. You came into my home, ate my food, played with my kids, then stole my wife. What the hell are you, Ryan? Ryan shrugged, voice rough. I didn't mean for it to go this far, Ethan. It just happened. Just happened? Ethan's laugh was sharp, bitter. No, you chose it. You both did. And now you're going to deal with it. He pulled out his phone, flashed the bar pics at them. I've got everything. Every second. Every lie. And I'm not letting it slide. Laura covered her face, sobbing now. Ethan, what do you want? I'll do anything to fix this. But he shook his head. Fix it? You can't. I've filed for divorce. The kids are mine, and I'm making sure everyone knows what's up. He didn't stop there. Next day, he sat at his desk, typing an email to their shared circle. Friends who'd come over for dinner, old Marine pals, neighbors who'd been at Sophie and Ben's birthday parties. He kept it short, no drama. Laura and Ryan have been cheating on me for months. They plan to ditch me and the kids. I'm not asking you to pick sides, just letting you know the truth. I can't keep acting like it's all good. He hit send, a mix of relief and ache washing over him as replies trickled in. Shock, support, a couple of silences. He didn't care who stood with him. He just wanted the mask off. With Sarah's help, Ethan locked down temporary custody. He started hunting for a new place, a 2-bedroom apartment in Meyerland, close to the kids' school. It wasn't as big as the Pinewood house, but it had a little balcony overlooking a park, and most importantly, no echoes of the past. The day he moved in, Laura kept the old place. He didn't want to stay where their life had turned to ash. Sophie hauled her science books, Ben lugged his Lego box, both chattering about decorating their rooms. Seeing them, Ethan felt a flicker of light through the dark. He still had a family, even if it was chipped around the edges. Before cutting ties completely, he wrote a letter by hand, mailing it to Laura's office. No typing. He wanted them to feel his words in every stroke. You broke what I built, but I'm not down. I've got the kids, the truth, and I'll live better than you think. You two can keep your lies. Good luck with that. He dropped it in the mailbox, not expecting a response, not wanting one. That first night in the apartment, Ethan stood on the balcony, a glass of water in hand, gazing out at the park below. Streetlights blinked, distant traffic hummed alongside the breeze rustling through small maples. Sophie and Ben were asleep inside, their steady breathing drifting out through the open door. He took a deep breath, cool air filling his lungs. The hurt lingered, a scar not yet faded, but it wasn't crushing him anymore. Ethan wasn't the betrayed husband hiding in the shadows now. He was the dad piecing a new life together, the Marine who'd faced worse than this and come out standing. Laura and Ryan could go on, to Austin or wherever, but they'd live under the weight they'd made, with sidelong glances from friends and coworkers who knew the score. Him? He picked a different road, not perfect, but his, with the people who really mattered. He stepped back inside, locked the balcony door, and flicked off the lights. Tomorrow he'd take Ben to kick a ball around, help Sophie with her volcano model. Life kept moving, and this time, he was the one steering it.